All right, guys, welcome back to my podcast. And this is the final segment. You're stuck with me. It's a little bit longer today. This will be on the final segments on YouTube, Instagram, and Facebook. And so if you have not been, your head stuck in the sand, you've heard the term Christian nationalism. And I haven't really dug into it that much because, you know, we're instinctual people. God's given us instincts as humans to just sniff out something that smells a lot like, you know what? Something that doesn't smell very good, put it that way. And that's exactly when I hear this stuff thrown around, but I'm like, I got to address this because this is just bothersome. And that's important. It's important to address tactics people use to try to deceive others. So where do we hear Christian nationalism? Because you don't hear it actually from any noteworthy conservative public official. No one says, hey, I'm a Christian nationalist. This is who I call myself. I don't know many, if any, at all. So first of all, it's a construct. And we'll talk about this. So what is the legacy media? How do the Marxists, how do the progressives, how do the legacy media, how do they define what a Christian nationalist is? Well, I looked it up because I was curious. So basically, they would say that someone who's a Christian nationalist will use their view on Christianity to promote and inspire legislation, civil law, criminal law, that is tied directly to their view on Christianity, okay? And like I said, where do we hear Christian nationalism? And that's important because when you hear it predominantly from people who don't identify themselves as Christian nationalists, you have to ask yourself, like, where's this coming from? And this goes back to the tactic I've talked about with these people. They parrot stuff like the legacy media with the newspaper, with public broadcasters who are all on the same page. They use the exact same terminology. And what they do is they try to create this perception, this narrative, that if someone, for example, is a Christian, and they embrace their faith, and they want their faith to inspire and to influence how they view public policy, for example, then they're a Christian nationalist. They're a threat. And when I think of like Christian nationalism, the way they're trying to describe it and apply it to people who are Christians who want to be involved in the public arena, first of all, it's just a foul lie. And we're going to discuss that here in a second. But when I think of like their term of Christian nationalism, I think, why don't you spend more time talking about what's going on in Iran and what's going on in Saudi Arabia? Those are theocratic states, right? And theocratic state basically are governments who their religion, a supreme being, is directly involved with how they govern civil law, criminal law. And you hear a lot of these people talk about human rights, these human rights activists here in this country, in America, right? That we're champions of social justice. Well, my question is, why don't you take up that mantra and that mantle across the world? Because we hear about how you're not a citizen of America, you're a citizen of the world. That's where your citizenship is. Well, then why don't you talk about the human rights violations going on in these countries? And it's important to talk about human rights violations and atrocities that are happening in Russia or Ukraine. I'm not saying that's not important to identify those places, but how come we're not hearing about this, in places in Africa, in places like Saudi Arabia and Iran? I'm kind of digressing a little bit, but you have to call out the hypocrisy, okay? So first of all, understand it's a stigma they're trying to apply to people who just want to stay true to their convictions and allow those convictions, what they agree with in their faith, to influence how they vote, because we're a democratic republic, right? We get to choose representatives who represent our ideals, our values, our principles, okay? That's extremely important. So again, as I said, and also let me ask, like, what is the threat of Christians, for example? Even if you're not a Christian, okay? Christians in society, all throughout human history. And I'm not talking about people who give lip service. I'm not talking about people like in the Inquisition who tried to force people to embrace Catholicism, or you were going to be killed, basically. Or, the Church of England, when our ancestors came over from England because they wanted to worship freely like the Puritans did. They didn't want to adhere to the edicts and the fiats of the Church of England. I'm not talking about that. That is manipulative religion that anyone can use to try to leverage their own proclivities. Okay? Not talking about that. If you are believing the message of Christ, of Jesus, his message, and living by those principles, what does it teach? You're a citizen. What do? You're honest. Okay? You treat people with respect and dignity. You raise your family, and you're a father and mother, and you raise your children with love and discipline. You teach them, right from wrong. You teach them virtue. My dad growing up, he'd read from this book called The Book of Virtues. And I love the book. It was just different stories about and anecdotes expressing the things that are virtuous. So people who are Christians are actually they pay their taxes, okay? They're for the most part compliant. They want to be reasonable. They want to honor those who are in authority over them, okay? So if you're trying to comprise a society of people who are hardworking, who are diligent, who are honest, who marry, who have children, you're going to want Christians in your society. Who wouldn't? Okay? But and I mentioned this in my last video, in my last podcast, what is one thing about Christianity that is a threat to the ruling class? It's a threat to progressives. It's a threat to the Marxists, the neo-Marxists, who, by the way, Marxism, Karl Marx, there was no place for God in communism. God was the state. So when you see communism and that nasty satanic ideology infiltrate here in America, you see there's no place for God in communism, because you know why? Because the state is at the top. That is, the hierarchy is the state. The government, that is God. Okay? But why would, someone who is, running a country or who wants to have a healthy, robust nation, why would you not want Christians, or why would you not want principles, virtues that emanate from Christianity? Why would you not want that saturated in your society? Well, I'll tell you, one of the main reasons, and I mentioned Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego from the Bible in the book of Daniel. They did not kowtow and capitulate to anyone other than God. Nebuchadnezzar in the Bible wasn't their God. The government wasn't their God. Babylon wasn't their God. Okay? And by the way, and this is tangentially related to what we're talking about here, having your faith, and we're going to get to this here in a second, I don't want to digress, but I want to mention this with Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who were political officials, as was Daniel. Their faith inspired and compelled them to action. And you know what happened actually with Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego? Religious boys, teenagers, their refusal to capitulate to Nebuchadnezzar in Babylon, you know what happened? They changed an empire, legitimately changed the trajectory of an empire. And it was political. Their allegiance to God and their fidelity to him in their faith impacted the political realm. Okay, so just to understand, they're not worried about Christians forcing them, like the Inquisition and the Church of England, to capitulate, because that's not Christianity. That's not, by the way. And when I hear people talk about the separation of church and state, Christians are all about having their religion imposed upon people. No, Jesus did not preach that. Anyone who's saying that, and I'm not hearing anyone in the public square say that, actually. So don't listen to the naysayers. And if you're someone who's kind of on the fringe and you're not sure what to think, look, guys, belief in Jesus, following him, has nothing to do with imposing yourself on someone else. Jesus didn't do that. He didn't preach that. So that is not what Christians do. But and this is a very important, and we're going to talk about this, because I think what has happened, many people in the church have been duped into believing and become apprehensive of allowing their commitment, their faith, in the public arena. They're very reticent. We want to keep our faith, don't mix faith and politics. You hear that adage a lot. I'm thinking to myself, if William Wilberforce didn't mix his faith with politics, would the slave trade been abolished? He was a politician in England, right? Sickness was if you haven't seen Amazing Grace with, I forget the actor's name, really good movie. Check that out. I think it was made back in like 2007. But you saw the affliction his body went through. You saw what he went through, the travails. But you also saw how his faith, his commitment to God, his commitment, his understanding that, you know what, all men are created equally. And that propelled him in the political realm to end. Now, tell me, raise your hand. You're a Christian. Are you not ecstatic and grateful for William Wilberforce and his commitment? But what if he had said, you know what, man, like I can't allow my faith to impact my politics? He wouldn't have gotten into the political arena. And you know what? Who knows how much longer and how much more it would have tarried for the slave trade to have been abolished. So you see, William Wilberforce was, his commitment to his faith propelled him. What about the abolitionists back during the Civil War? I mean, that was the move that ended slavery. The move that ended slavery was from the abolitionists, or excuse me, the Christians who were abolitionists. That's what ended slavery. One of the main catalysts, people who got involved in the political arena, right? Who said, you know what, like I believe what the Constitution says, that all men are created equally with certain unalienable rights endowed by their Creator. You believe that, and those principles, those godly principles enshrined in the Constitution, is what propelled the abolitionists, who many were Christians, to end slavery in this country. Which, again, who is not ecstatic and grateful for that? And one of the things that's interesting, and I'm going to mention some examples here. This is something that's really important for me. I'm going to talk a little bit about this, maybe a few more minutes, but I think about like leaders in the church, people who are Christian, who are apprehensive of mixing their politics with their faith. Well, think about this. Our ancestors left England, the Church of England, to establish freedom here in this nation, freedom to worship the way they wanted to worship, freedom to be able to pursue God the way they wanted to pursue God. And so our founding documents, which, like it or not, guys, and you look at the founders, not all of them were Christians. Some of them were deists. Some of them were nominal, but almost all of them were a part of a church. All of them had a grid for God. And yes, they were, influenced by different movements, Greek philosophers, reasoning, rational thinking. But the Bible, moral absolutes, the 10 Commandments, Judeo-Christian values, absolutely all are the catalyst, were the catalyst in founding our documents that helped our nation, and Rush Limbaugh said this, become the most prosperous nation who's given the most wealth to the most amount of people in the history of mankind. And so you look at these documents, and the documents that our founding fathers bled for, our forefathers bled for, has enabled Christians, enabled church leaders, pastors, to espouse their beliefs. Think about that. The values, the political document we have allows you and me right now to share my religious convictions on social media. So do we not have a right? Do we not have a compulsion? Should we not be moved? You know what I'm saying? Like that to me is obvious. If we're trying to distance ourselves from the political arena, and what I mean by that is, obviously I'm not talking about running for office. If that's what you feel you're called to, then do it, and you have a desire for that, of course. But I'm talking about just getting involved in your municipalities, your local elections, voting, being invested in who you're voting for, not just being a party line voter. You know what I'm saying? Like knowing the people, are the people you're voting for, are they aligned with godly values? You know what? And even, I have no problem saying this. My faith propels me with my positions on the sanctity of life. It's absolutely essential. My faith propels me in my understanding that God created man and woman. There is no alternative. There is no ambiguity. Okay? We shouldn't be ambivalent about these things. My faith propels me to be involved. What I'm doing right now, my faith propels me. Do I do it perfectly? No, I know I make some mistakes. But if we don't allow our faith to propel us to get involved, we have a moral responsibility to resist evil wherever it is. Do you not think God wants to drive out the kingdom of hell in every quadrant of the world, regardless of where it's at? And yeah, he wants to fortify the church. That is extremely important. But my goodness, guys, do you not think the kingdoms of the world, as it says in Revelation, will become the kingdoms of our Lord and of his Christ? He has a desire to move out, to drive out the kingdom of hell and usher in his kingdom. And I think about people in Nazi Germany. The church became impotent and allowed Nazi ideology to run rampant. And they're like, you know what? We're cool within our church. We'll stick to our proselytizing, our evangelizing within the church. But you know, when it comes to the political arena, when it comes to combating the dangers of Nazism, early on, when it could have been combated, they were impotent. They were held in a state of paralysis. Okay, and we would not have the opportunity right now to speak, to evangelize, to go out and to minister to people as Christians if we didn't have a political document that allowed us to do that. Okay, and of course, I don't want to not mention, of course, we look in the Bible and there were people who, especially during the Roman Empire, that still ministered, and they were, hunted down and put in the Colosseum and killed. And it was horrible, so I understand that. But what I'm saying, I'm giving you a principle here that's important to understand, that our ability to live life, to go to church, and you know what happened? COVID-19 was used and leveraged to prevent us a fundamental right of gathering together and worshiping with one another. So should we not resist that? Should we not, and again, peacefully resist is what I'm saying. But that's important, guys. And I think right now the church is waking up. People are waking up. And you know what? Even if you're someone who doesn't embrace Christianity, the idea of living a virtuous, principled life is something that's going to benefit society as a whole. So I'm going to close up here, but I want to encourage us. First of all, when you hear the legacy media, when you hear people discussing Christian nationalism as an existential threat, understand it's a threat to them, because that means they can't control and manipulate, because there's a higher order that we follow and that we yield to. And in addition to that, finally, what I want to say is, as an exhortation, if you're not open to this, if you're closed off to this, understand that, and this is an important worldview that I believe, that I hold on to, that really has impacted me, and my belief in getting involved is that our Christian faith should move us to drive out the works of the devil anywhere we see it, whether it's in public education, obviously in the political apparatus, whether it's in Hollywood, whether it's in music. God made these things. He's the God of the arts. He's the God of music, okay? He set these things up in beautiful symmetry. And he's given them to us as human beings to subdue, okay? And to be influences, to be lights, man. He didn't give us to be. Look, you weren't meant to be under a table, okay? As a light. You're meant to be on a table in whatever way that looks like. And I'm telling you this, and I will truly end with this. I keep saying this. This stuff gets me passionate. Wherever you're called, or wherever you, even if you're not a Christian right now, wherever your desire is pulling you, pushing you to, you may not realize this. Probably the Holy Spirit is probably God in your life doing that, just to let you know. But do it with confidence, with virtue, with principle and conviction, and also understand that's important. You're making a difference, and you don't have to feel like you're condensed in just these parameters inside the church. The church is meant to equip, to teach, and empower, to go out to disciple the nations, and that can be in a lot of different ways. Okay, I could say more. I feel like I've hit the points I wanted to hit. Guys, be encouraged. If you haven't checked out my first 2 segments, check those out. This is a longer podcast today. Break it down, put it on in the car. If you have a long road trip, listen up, man. Appreciate you guys tuning in. Thank you for taking the time, and I will catch you all soon. All right, have a good weekend. Bye.